The United States government on paper is a marvel of democratic design. Rooted in the Constitution, it presents a system of checks and balances, a separation of powers among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, and a commitment to the principles of representation and public accountability. This architecture was meant to prevent tyranny, ensuring that no single entity could wield unchecked authority. The executive branch, headed by the president, enforces laws and directs national policy. The legislative branch, composed of the House of Representatives and the Senate, drafts and passes laws. The judicial branch, led by the Supreme Court, interprets laws and safeguards constitutional principles. Each branch possesses tools to restrain the others. The president can veto congressional bills, Congress can override vetoes and impeach officials, and the courts can declare laws or executive actions unconstitutional. In theory, this system fosters balance. Democratic ideals shine through promises of free and fair elections, public participation in government, and elected officials serving as true representatives of their constituents. Transparency mechanisms like the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, and congressional hearings offer citizens a window into government operations, reinforcing the notion that accountability is not a privilege but a fundamental right. Watchdog groups and investigative journalists operate as democracy's guardians, ensuring that those in power remain answerable to the people. Yet beneath this polished facade lies a far murkier reality. The U.S. government, as it functions today, is an intricate web of hidden influences and unseen forces. Corporate money has seeped into the very foundation of legislation. Lobbyists representing powerful industries, from big pharma to fossil fuels, wield immense sway over lawmakers. Super political action committees, super PACs, and dark money groups funnel unlimited funds into campaigns, often obscuring the true sources of these donations. The result is a legislative process that frequently prioritizes corporate profits over public interest. Consider the battle over healthcare reform. Major pharmaceutical companies spend millions lobbying against measures that would lower drug prices, ensuring that even widely supported policies struggle to gain traction. Climate legislation, too, often faces an uphill battle as oil and gas giants pour resources into campaigns that protect their bottom lines. Beyond corporate influence, there exists the concept of the deep state. Not a shadowy cabal, but the reality of entrenched bureaucrats and intelligence agencies that operate with a degree of continuity, regardless of who occupies the Oval Office. Agencies like the CIA and NSA hold immense power, conducting covert operations and influencing foreign policy in ways that often elude public scrutiny. National security concerns frequently serve as a shield, allowing critical decisions to unfold behind closed doors, far from the prying eyes of voters. Presidents may change, but the machinery of intelligence and defense rolls on, propelled by career officials whose loyalty lies not with any administration, but with institutional stability and strategic imperatives. Then there is the revolving door, a well-trodden path between government positions and corporate boardrooms. High-ranking officials often leave public service only to resurface as lobbyists or executives for industries they once regulated. Former lawmakers become consultants for companies seeking legislative favors, while corporate leaders secure influential government roles that allow them to shape policy from within. This blurred line between public duty and private profit erodes trust, raising uncomfortable questions about whose interests truly guide policymaking. Congress, the heart of legislative power, presents its own set of contradictions. Partisan gridlock has become a defining feature, with lawmakers frequently locked in ideological battles that stall meaningful progress. Bipartisanship, once a cornerstone of effective governance, now appears increasingly elusive. The quiet manipulations of gerrymandering further distort representation. State legislatures redraw electoral maps to favor one party, diluting the power of opposing voters and ensuring political entrenchment. Voter suppression tactics, from restrictive ID laws to limited polling locations, subtly but effectively marginalize certain communities, undermining the very principle of fair elections. Meanwhile, behind the public spectacle of fiery floor speeches and press conferences, backroom deals dictate much of Congress's work. Omnibus bills, massive catch-all legislation often rushed through without thorough debate, allow lawmakers to slip in pet projects and special interests. Pork barrel spending, where funds are directed to specific districts to secure political support, further muddies the legislative waters. These clandestine negotiations, while legal, reveal a side of governance far removed from the transparent, principled processes taught in civics classes. The U.S. government is, in essence, a paradox. It upholds the rhetoric of democracy while grappling with the realities of influence, secrecy, and political maneuvering. To understand how it truly works, one must look beyond the official narrative, past the carefully crafted image of checks and balances, and into the intricate, often uncomfortable mechanisms that shape policy and power. The American presidency, often viewed as the apex of democratic leadership, wields a power that frequently stretches beyond the constitutional boundaries designed by the nation's founders. While the Constitution outlines a system in which Congress writes laws and the president enforces them, the modern reality is more complex and, at times, more unsettling. Presidents have found ways to sidestep legislative hurdles, relying on executive orders and emergency powers to push their agendas without congressional approval. These tools, though legal, allow presidents to unilaterally shape policy, from military actions abroad to domestic initiatives, blurring the line between executive enforcement and lawmaking. Executive orders, intended as administrative directives, have evolved into potent instruments of policy. Franklin D. Roosevelt issued over 3,700 orders, some of which laid the groundwork for internment camps during World War II. More recently, presidents have used these orders to implement sweeping immigration policies, impose economic sanctions, and sidestep stalled legislative processes. Emergency powers, rooted in the National Emergencies Act of 1976, provide even greater latitude. Once a president declares a national emergency, they can reallocate funds, impose martial law, or suspend certain legal protections, often without meaningful oversight. Donald Trump's emergency declaration to secure border wall funding and Joe Biden's use of emergency health powers during the COVID-19 pandemic both underscore how fluid and expansive presidential authority has become. Beyond formal powers, modern presidents often draw strength from unelected advisors, a cadre of think tanks, billionaire donors, and so-called kitchen cabinets who quietly influence policy behind closed doors. These figures, unaccountable to voters, help craft foreign and domestic strategies that serve ideological or financial interests rather than public welfare. Conservative think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and liberal counterparts like the Center for American Progress shape presidential agendas, drafting policy blueprints that administrations often adopt wholesale. Meanwhile, billionaire donors, from the Koch brothers to George Soros, pour vast sums into campaigns and advocacy groups, ensuring their voices resonate louder than the average citizens. This hidden network of influence fosters a political landscape where access to power often hinges not on democratic participation, but on wealth and connections. Foreign policy operates in even murkier waters, with presidents often engaging in covert operations and undeclared wars. The Constitution grants Congress the authority to declare war, yet modern presidents have repeatedly bypassed this requirement. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and countless counterterrorism operations unfolded without formal declarations, relying instead on ambiguous authorizations or executive prerogatives. The CIA, under presidential direction, has orchestrated coups, assassinations, and clandestine military interventions, from the overthrow of Iran's government in 1953 to drone strikes in Yemen. These actions, shielded by national security concerns, evade public scrutiny and congressional oversight, reinforcing an unsettling truth. Much of America's foreign policy is crafted in the shadows, where democratic accountability holds little sway. If the presidency embodies unchecked power, the judiciary, particularly the Supreme Court, serves as both a guardian of law and, at times, a political weapon. Supreme Court appointments grant presidents a lasting legacy, as justices hold lifetime tenures, shaping legal precedent for decades. The court's rulings on abortion, voting rights, and corporate regulations transcend presidential terms, cementing ideological victories long after administrations change. Recent appointments, such as those made by Donald Trump, have shifted the court's balance sharply to the right, emboldening conservative rulings on issues like gun rights and environmental protections.
And action.
Beneath the veneer of impartiality, judicial nominations often reflect raw political strategy. Presidents, in concert with Senate allies, select judges who align with their ideological goals, ensuring that the judiciary advances specific policy aims. The battle over Merrick Garland's stalled nomination and the rushed confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett exemplify how judicial appointments have become high-stakes political battles. Judicial activism, where courts proactively shape policy, and judicial restraint, where they defer to legislative intent, are wielded as rhetorical weapons, depending on whose agenda is at stake. The same critics who decry activist rulings on social issues may embrace judicial assertiveness when it dismantles regulatory laws or expands corporate rights. Dark money further taints the judicial nomination process as untraceable funds pour into campaigns designed to influence court appointments. Groups like the Federalist Society and Demand Justice operate as ideological gatekeepers, vetting judicial candidates and orchestrating public pressure campaigns. These organizations, bankrolled by anonymous donors, effectively buy judicial influence, turning supposedly neutral courts into battlegrounds for political power. The shadowy flow of money, coupled with strategic appointments, transforms the judiciary into an extension of partisan agendas rather than a bulwark against them. Ultimately, the presidency and judiciary, two pillars of American governance, reveal the nation's uneasy balance between democratic ideals and political reality. The president, empowered by executive orders, hidden advisors, and secretive foreign operations, often governs with minimal oversight. The judiciary, shaped by lifelong appointments and dark money influence, carries out long-term ideological battles under the guise of legal interpretation. Far from the checks and balances envisioned by the Constitution, these branches of government increasingly reflect a struggle for control where power operates not in the open halls of democracy, but in the unseen corridors of influence.